So I'm going to tell you some traditional stories, not some personal stories. So it's a little bit different from what the fantastic Stephen was doing on his travelling story. So my travelling takeaway, I'm going to get us there, is I'm going to tell you stories from all over the world. Sound good? Those of you who were here when I was here before know how this goes. I say story, story, and you say story. I say once upon a time, and you say time, time. I promise to take you far, far away. I promise to bring you back at the end. Are you ready? Yeah! Story, story. Story! Once upon a time. Time! Long time ago in Africa, there was a tribe of people. And they were known as the invisible people. And they were known as the invisible people because of the way they moved. They moved so quietly. They disappeared behind the trees. You couldn't see them. And they were nomadic. They traveled from place to place. They lived off the land. They hunted what they needed. They picked what they needed. And they kept going. Well, this one year, it had been a tough year. Because they had had a lot of famine. They had a lot of drought. And most of their tribe had died out. They only had 9 warriors left. 9 warriors, 9 spears. That's not a lot of manpower. And they were sitting around their fires and the winter was coming on. And as they sat there, they suddenly smelled this strong smell of cooking coming over the mountain. Really strong, like there was a lot of cooking pots. And then they heard this sound. If you can take your hands and just smack them off your legs like that. Sound of many hands on many drums. There's a huge new tribe walking on the other side of that mountain. And the drumming stopped. And their hearts filled with fear because they knew that meant the drumming stopped, they were settling. They were settling on the other side of that mountain. And if that new tribe found the invisible people, they'd be killed. All of them. And they looked around, the women and the children and the old people, they looked and they counted the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 men. And so they looked to the one wise person in the tribe. There's always one, there's a shaman, there's a medicine man or a medicine woman. Well, they had this old, mad medicine woman. And much like Stephen in Thailand, she liked to also drink mushroom shakes. When things were tough, that's what she would do. She would go looking for that special little plant, and she'd find it. And now all her people were in trouble, all her people were in sadness, they were in despair, and she knew what she had to do. She reached down, she picked it up and made it into a lovely paste in her mouth. And as it began to dissolve into her saliva and down the back of her throat, she felt her eyes shoot open, you know, the blacks of her eyes. And she felt herself start to spin with the gravity of the earth, and she threw herself down and she stared up at the sky and she had this beautiful vision. It filled her mind's eye, it was so powerful, and suddenly she heard this song in her head, and the song was so loud, and she was looking at the stars, and she started laughing. Really laughing. And all the people who had been crying were now looking at her. And she sat up and she said, I have the answer. I know what we're going to do. And she grabbed the 9 warriors and she told them the plan. And they all looked at her and said, have you gone completely mad? No, it's going to work, it's going to work. It's a brilliant plan. You have to do it. Okay, find your star. Right. And she was still coming down off the mushrooms and she said, okay, now is the time. The darkness is coming on. We have to go now while our hearts are strong. Come on. And she started to walk quietly, silently, up the mountain. And the 9 warriors with their 9 spears, with their hearts in their throats, and their fear in their eyes, they began to walk quietly up the mountain. When they got to the top, they stopped, and they looked down, and they saw all the fires of that new tribe. And there were so many, they couldn't even count them. And she looked at them and she said, come on. And she tiptoed down the mountain. And they all followed down after, so silently in the dark that that new tribe didn't hear them. And she gave them all the nod. And each warrior went looking for his star. And when they found the star they'd been given, they stood under it and they waited. And each warrior could see one man to his far, far, far left, and one fellow warrior to his far, far, far right. And when they were all standing, they were in a huge circle in the dark where you couldn't hear a mobile phone at all. I'm as bad, mine went over in. That's all I could see was one over there and one over there. So that meant only 2 warriors could see the medicine woman. And they looked to her, and she opened up her mouth, and she began to sing. And they all knew they had to sing exactly what she sang. Ooh, Alewa. Tiki tiki tongwa.
Tiki tiki tongwa.
Walla walla walla.
Walla walla walla.
Aluwe, aluwe, aluwa.
Aluwe, aluwe, aluwa.
And their voices were so strong in the dark, they sounded like a lot more people than mine. And you know what the song said? The song said, we are strong. We are powerful. Do not come into our land. Do not invade our territory, or we will crush you. And all the new tribe, they looked out towards the sound of the singing. Who was this tribe that was threatening them? And all the warriors picked up their spears. And they stepped to the very edge of the light. And the medicine woman, she opened up her mouth. And she reached down to sing even louder. Ooh! Alewa!
Ooh! Alewa!
Tiki tiki tongwa!
Tiki tiki tongwa.
Walla walla walla!
Walla walla walla.
Ooh! Aluwe! Aluwe! Aluwa!
Aluwe, aluwe, aluwa.
Don't come into our territory. Don't come onto our land. We are fierce. We are strong. If you do, we will crush you. Now all the women, they grabbed all the babies by the fire, and all the old people in that new tribe, they began to huddle by the fire. And the medicine woman, she wanted to hammer home the point just one last time. She looked at her warriors, she gave them the nod. Now they had to open up their bellies, take in the biggest breath they could, throw their mouths up to the stars, and they went, ooh! Alewa!
Ooh! Alewa!
Tiki tiki tongwa!
Tiki tiki tongwa.
Walla walla walla!
Walla walla walla.
Aluwe, aluwe, aluwa.
Aluwe, aluwe, aluwa.
And their voices were like a legion of voices, like 10 million voices, the way they echoed off the sides of the mountain, cascading down on that new tribe. They sounded so fierce and so big that all the warriors that were standing there with their spears took a couple of steps back. They looked out into the dark and very purposefully put down their weapons. They held up their hands to say, no, no, we're moving on. We're sorry. And they began to put out their fires and they began to move. But the 9 warriors and the medicine woman, they slipped back into the dark. They slipped back up their mountain path, so invisible, so quiet. They got to the top, and just as they got over the crest, the peak, this end of the mountain, down the other side, all of them looked at each other and started. And they tumbled and rolled down the mountain with the laughter filling their bellies and filling their feet and filling their mouths until they all arrived at a big heap at the bottom where the few women and the old people and the babies were waiting, looking at this giggling horde laughing at the dark. But what happened? And they told a story. And as they told the story, the women started to laugh, and big fat tears of laughter rolled down their faces, and the little kids started to laugh because finally everybody was starting to have fun again. And the old people started to laugh, and they knew, they laughed with relief because they knew they would survive that winter. And they did. They lived on and they lived on. But whenever it got really dark, whenever they lost a lot of their loved ones, whenever they lost a lot of money and jobs and recession, they knew all they had to do was to gather together. All they had to do was open their mouths, tell that story, sing that song, and the winter never seemed so dark. Thank you. That story only works because you're fantastic.